All right, so we're coming off a horrific weekend with the savage murders of hundreds of Israelis, thousands of people total in the Israeli Gaza area. I don't want to wade too much into that because it's being covered by other people. It's not really the focus of this particular conversation. But I'm on today with somebody who's a gun expert, and we're going to talk about sort of the wider implications that this could have for the United States. Kerry Sloan, she's the executive director for education for the Crime Prevention Research Center. Kerry, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, you know what's going on over there. In the wake of that particular attack, now we have some other threats that are being attributed to the United States and some of the dangers that we may pose here because of our poor southern border. And we've had multiple House representatives now come out and issue warnings, and we have some disturbing data coming from the CBP. Real quick, let me just read you some of these posts and some of this information. Representative Andy Biggs says that, well, he's asked on Twitter the other day, well, it's now social media platform X, how many Hamas sleeper cells have crossed our southern border under the Biden administration's policies, adding that we're not prepared. Marjorie Taylor Greene says, since the Biden administration's open border policies has allowed our country to be invaded by millions of unknown people from over 160 countries, including terrorists, will the Biden FBI keep targeting January 6 protesters, or will they question any of the pro-Hamas protesters and their connections since they were out using their free speech against Israel today? And then Fox News reporter Bill Malugin reported the latest CBP data that has been confirmed by CBP sources, and that would be U.S. Customs Border Protection Agency, that thousands of quote unquote special interest aliens, mostly from Middle Eastern countries, have been apprehended by Border Patrol while crossing into the U.S. illegally over the last 2 years. Tons of numbers here: 538 from Syria, 139 from Yemen, 659 from Iran, 123 from Iraq, 6,386 from Afghanistan, 164 from Lebanon, 3,153 from Egypt, another 1,600 plus from Pakistan, 15,000 from Mauritania, 13,000 plus from Uzbekistan, and 30,830 from Turkey. Obviously, these are stunning numbers for anybody who's concerned with border security and the implication that it could have. And, one of the things that we saw with the Israel attacks is that as people were fleeing the concert, these people were lining up in the street and just shot them as they were driving down the street. So, I mean, for an attack that to take place in the United States, there wouldn't have to be a great deal of sophistication. I mean, what are the sort of the self-protection implications for the United States in the wake of what we've just seen?
Well, first I wanted to kind of comment on, the data, those numbers that were coming in regards to the Middle Eastern, what do they call them, the special interest immigrants. And I controversial like to say that, quite frankly, they're aliens, illegal aliens. And that is something that a lot of people, like, when you come to this country, you are an alien, whether legal or not. And so I think that a lot of a bigger picture kind of softens that a little bit. And what happens is that when you start to soften that language, in any capacity, it starts to allow for, well, these people, but not these people type of a thing. And then, of course, the bigger picture is where we end up like we are now. And so all of those numbers that you just read are startling, but that's the numbers we know. How many more are coming in that we don't even know about or that haven't been identified? There are areas of those borders where people are coming through with abandon and they're not being checked into this, through the system, with the U.S. government. So that alone is a huge implication of the illegal aliens coming into this country. They've known forever. I shouldn't say forever, but since the Biden administration loosened up the restrictions, that we've had Middle Eastern illegal aliens coming into this country and not knowing where they're going after they've been checked in. So again, the ones that we know of. So I think that it is a huge concern. I know a lot of people in America, they tend to focus on the more micro picture of this in terms of people being broken into or street crime and this type of stuff. And I think that there's a lot of distraction happening in the media with those types of crimes from the illegal alien activity versus the bigger picture of a legitimate terrorist threat that we could very well be seeing. And if I am so bold to say controversially, I think it's by design.
Yeah, I've seen some accounts that suggest that there would be great difficulty in accepting the idea that nobody in the intelligence services knew this was happening. One of the things that seems to have changed over in Israel is that now they're being allowed to carry firearms because, again, it's another situation where had they been armed, they might have been able to repel a lot of this. So I guess in terms of our stance here in the United States, I mean, what are the implications for us here in the U.S. in terms of what this should mean for gun control within this particular country?
Well, the fact that simultaneously you're seeing an uptick in the rhetoric coming from the pro-gun control side, including the politicians as well as the gun control groups, there has been an uptick in the rhetoric regarding assault weapon ban again, right? It goes in cycles, as we all know. So I find it interesting that there's been an uptick in that at the same time that we're seeing something that we should, I believe, as Americans consider a legitimate threat with the illegal alien activity. And I want to read you some statistics here. These are just some overview. If you go to Crime Prevention Research Center, crimeresearch.org is the website. You can find a lot more of this information out there. John Lott, the founder and researcher, he has put a lot of this on there. But approximately, and this is estimated because we don't have, exact numbers, but approximately 3.4% of Israeli adults have permits to carry. In America, 8.5% of Americans have permits to carry. Now, interestingly enough, when you take out California and New York, the number of Americans, so if you just take them out because their laws are the most restrictive, so they tend to skew the numbers a little bit. So if you take California and New York out, 10.2% of Americans have licenses to carry. And every one of the states that supports that tends to holistically support gun control, they're pushing for even greater restrictions. And they're doing so at a time when you have a country like Israel right now is telling its Netanyahu requested the Israeli government to loosen restrictions after some warnings in September on Yom Kippur when they were encouraging people to carry their guns. So I find it ironic and kind of bizarre that we're seeing this rhetoric uptick in more gun control at the same time a country that just was attacked is trying to loosen the restrictions to allow the citizens to carry. Their national security minister, I'm going to butcher his name, so I'm just going to leave it to the last. It's Ben-Gvir has told the firearm licensing division, the Israeli firearm licensing division, to allow the citizens to have access to their guns. And I just sit and wonder how many people could have survived those attacks. How many women could have been prevented from being kidnapped and raped and murdered and paraded around and all of that horrific stuff that we saw in the children and the elderly. How many of those could have been prevented had the Israeli government allowed people to carry their firearms at all times rather than having them stored in government storage and now after the fact allowing them to have their guns?
And that's something that we see here in the United States as well. I mean, it's like all of the laws and restrictions that go around firearms from the gun control lobby. And I get that they think their intentions are noble, but it always has the impact of disarming law-abiding citizens and leaving people helpless who otherwise would have been able to defend themselves.
Yeah, if you go to crimeresearch.org, there's countless pieces of data and research. I know you've kind of been through it. You and I have talked about that just on the side about there's so much on there that sometimes it can be overwhelming, proving that when law-abiding citizens have access to firearms, that they're more likely to be able to survive or be able to help reduce mass shootings or other attacks. Whereas a criminal that is prohibited under these laws of having a gun, they're going to get one anyway. And so that these laws don't have any real effect on crime. In short, there's never been a gun control law in United States history that's effectively ended violence committed with guns. However, every single one of those laws that have been put in place inhibits law-abiding citizens from being able to access their firearms in an effective manner to defend themselves and their communities.
So as far as general trends, I mean, there seems to be, ironically, an uptick in legislation that's getting passed to try to make gun control more pervasive throughout the United States, even despite the Supreme Court's Bruin ruling last year, which should have produced the opposite result. But the general trend seems to be that there's more interest in people, especially among the African American population and women, who are taking up firearms and buying more guns, doing more training and that sort of thing. I mean, what sorts of overall trends are you seeing throughout the United States? I mean, is that perception correct?
It's not just a perception, Adrian. It is actually a fact. I joke within the community and the industry that I work in that the industry has been saying that women are the fastest growing demographic of gun owners since 1776 because they've been saying it for years. I've been in the industry for 5 years. I've been hearing it every year. But just within the past 2 years, 2 to 3 years, we're actually seeing concrete data coming out of the NICS system, the FBI's background check system, showing that the largest demographic of purchases, new gun purchases, are being made by women. So approximately 50% of the gun purchases being made for the past 2.5 years, we don't have data for, up to the minute. So we'll say to be safely from 20 to 22 are women. And of those 50% of women, approximately 35 to 40% are Black women living in urban communities. So you are correct that we are seeing those numbers proving that these are the communities and the demographic that are being most that are making the decision and realizing that they're the only people that can protect themselves or themselves. And so that has been a huge shift. And I find it ironic personally that so many women support gun control, right? Moms Demand, Everytown, all of these groups are largely, ran by women, yet women are now beginning to push back with those firearm purchases and saying enough is enough. So I think that that's a really interesting dynamic that a lot of people don't directly address.
Well, it's again that they have these noble goals and this noble intent, but what they don't seem to understand, and I assume they don't understand it. I don't want to assume bad motives. But what they fail to grasp is that all of the policies they push actually end up making women more vulnerable. Is for a lot of women, I mean, the firearm is the only tool that can sort of level the playing field against the bigger man that's looking to do them harm.
Correct. And again, our website, crimeresearch.org, you can actually find data that reinforces that women are one of the demographics that are most benefited from gun ownership. Women, the elderly, and minorities living in the cities are the three that are most benefited by owning firearms. And I think that the angle that is used, and there's a bigger picture here, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds on this. We could do that another time if you want. But essentially, they go after it with the safety thing. We want to keep our kids safe. We want to stay safe, right? Well, gun owners are not people that don't want to be safe. We want to be safe too. Like nobody disagrees that we want to keep our family safe. That's a common ground that we have. However, a little controversial opinion I have even in the industries, I personally work with women outside the industry, right? 99% of the industry gun owning community forgets that there are about 1% of people in America that own guns or would own a gun, right? Because they don't understand the bigger picture. And oftentimes I find that when we sit down and explain to them some of these laws, they go, oh, I didn't see it that way. And it's because and we're gonna get a little conspiratorial here, so stick with me because it's not in the weeds, y'all. It's not in the weeds, but a lot of people, the pro-gun side, think that these Moms Demand and Everytown and all of these organizations want to disarm us. No, I don't think that that's the case. I think that they genuinely believe that reducing the amount of guns that people own will create a safer environment. I think they're being manipulated by bigger power, politicians, and so on and so forth, that do want to encourage disarmament. I mean, we've seen things out of Bloomberg, and who's a heavy, financier of these organizations, talk about wanting to see, nobody own guns, but the government essentially. So I think that there's a disconnect there that people don't realize, that these organizations, they literally think that they're going at this from a safety issue, but they're being manipulated by a greater force to push an agenda for that bigger force. If that makes any sense.
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And I could sort of sympathize with that. If you're somebody who's lost somebody to gun violence, it would make sense that you would want to try to address that problem. And if you're attuned to media outlets that don't talk about the facts like we discuss, and they haven't been to your website and seen that, or seen the FBI data, or seen any real crime statistics. They don't know that 68% of all firearm deaths in the United States are suicides, another 20% are gang related. So if we take those out, I mean, there's literally almost no gun crime in the United States once we factor those things out. They haven't heard any of this information before, right? So it's tough to sort of take a well-reasoned position on this. But I think at the end of the day, we also have to get back to the constitutionality of it and say that, just because that crime has happened to somebody else, it doesn't justify stripping away the constitutional rights of law-abiding Americans who've committed no crimes.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we actually cover that in the upcoming case, the United States versus Vrahimi, which is a whole red flag law case in domestic violence, which I'm an abuse survivor. That's what threw me into this, was speaking against the laws that negatively impact me as an abuse survivor from being able to defend myself. From at that time, my abuser was stalking me. And that's very common, unfortunately. And so we address that, and we actually have the data, our organization does, to prove that several things, but one, that restraining orders don't actually keep victims safer. That's one of them. But the bigger picture, and what you're talking about with the constitutionality, is we prove in our amicus brief that we wrote for, or I didn't write it. I get the information out to y'all. John's the one that writes that stuff. But that there has never been another right guaranteed to us in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that's ever been used to control people. Like, it's never been regulated to control people. So it's really First Amendment a little bit, but not like the Second Amendment, and certainly not to the point where they want to, completely take it away. So the Second Amendment is really the only one that's ever been attacked, for lack of a better term, the way it has. No other guarantee in our Bill of Rights has been attacked that way.
So but why do you think that is?
Well, it goes back to that bigger picture of, we're clearly seeing, a government, right? There's a lot of argument out there, and I'm sure a lot of y'all have seen it if you're on the internet at all, right? That the only thing that keeps us safe or away from a government that's overreaching is firearm ownership. And I think that you can see some of that in the states, that have stricter gun control law. Look how much, worse the crime is in states like New York, California, the city of Chicago, how much worse the crimes committed with guns. I don't believe in the term gun violence. It's a made-up term. It's unfortunate that a lot of people on the pro-2A side, or the more conservative-leaning side, have subconsciously adopted that phrase, because there is no such thing as gun violence. There is violence committed with guns. My ex-husband almost killed me with his fists, and I don't see people calling it fist or abuser violence. So part of that language is factoring into the perception and the concept of what violence is. And so therefore, because the gun happens to be something that has a higher chance of fatality, I think it's targeted more than some of the other forms of self-defense. And as you mentioned earlier, a gun being the great equalizer. I mean, that is a fact, especially for a woman. There isn't a better tool for self-defense for a woman than a firearm.
And, just to sort of get back to what we talked about at the beginning here in terms of the more broad perspective on why this is going to be a reignited discussion, we have incidents that have occurred in the U.S. that would suggest that maybe we need to sort of revisit this. I mean, aside from just the increased violence in cities like, Los Angeles and Chicago and St. Louis and all the places, Houston, the things you see on TV. We had that music festival in Las Vegas a couple of years ago where people were senselessly slaughtered. So all in all, I mean, it seems like if you really wanted to take a position that was morally sound, that would be erring on the side of protecting people rather than erring on the side of leaving them defenseless.
Yeah, we've got the statistics on our website. I've got some notes here. Let me dig back through them. You and I have talked about this, about how many, that we've got so many statistics on this website that it's hard to keep track of them all, to be really honest with you. But it's the number of mass shootings that have been stopped. If you go to the website, it's on one of the first pinned articles where John Lott had debunked the FBI's numbers about active shooters, and where the FBI says that only, I don't know, was it 30%? He's going to kill me for not having that right in front of me on my notes here. But that have been stopped, but it's actually more like 67% of active shootings have been stopped. Now, that's not even factoring in the shootings where a law-abiding permitted gun owner has drawn a gun and never fired a shot, right? We're talking about even with shots. But approximately, we know this, that approximately there are two, give or take. And again, some of it we'll never know, because if there was no shot fired, you may not know, what have you. But there's approximately 2 million defensive gun uses in the United States a year. And the media only reports about 2,000 of them. So I had to draw my gun on a crazy homeless guy in Seattle one time. And, while that wasn't a mass shooting or I prevented a violent attack just by drawing my firearm. Thank the Lord I didn't have to, fire it. But that would be classified. I stopped a violent attack by drawing my firearm. So I think that the government's, I personally believe, willful manipulation of the data only feeds into the fear mongering that is fed to people through the gun control organizations.
Well, this is definitely an important issue, and I hope we can continue to have, not just you and I, but a more honest and broad conversation about this. Again, we're seeing more people who are being open to the idea of firearms and self-defense and wanting to protect themselves and their family, which I think is a fantastic thing. You are obviously a major part of that conversation, so thank you for everything that you're doing. Once again, where can people find you on social media or any other place for the work that you're doing with CPRC?
Well, with CPRC, you can find all of the research at Crime Prevention Research Center crimeresearch.org. That is a huge database with a very good search engine, because just to go on there, you might be overwhelmed. I promise. Just go to the search engine, tap into words. The search engine is very good at pulling up radio interviews, TV interviews, articles, everything that you need. And then there's links to data in there. If you're a data person, you like to look at charts and tables. Those confuse me. I have my John, he breaks those down for me, and then I bring that information to y'all. You can find us on Twitter at Crime Research number 1, and you can find us on Instagram at crimeresearch_.org, Facebook at Crime Research, Crime Prevention Research Center on Facebook.
No, spit it out.
That's a mouthful. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Gary,
it's a long name just go to crimeresearch.org and you can find us.
Hey, perfect. Thanks for being on today.
Thank you for having me.